What happens when late-night comedy drifts from humor into means? What happens when the man who commands the microphone, the laughter, and the cameras realizes that control can disappear in a heartbeat? That night, the studio felt charged. The lights burned hotter than usual, shining down like interrogation lamps on both the host and his guest. The audience murmured with excitement, expecting the usual flow of playful jokes, easy laughter, and another smooth Hollywood interview. But behind the scenes, something very different was about to unfold. It took only 34 seconds. 34 seconds of smug confidence, cutting humor, and one pointed remark for Jimmy Kimmel's carefully crafted dominance to start slipping in front of millions. His trademark smirk normally, his sharpest tool became the spark that ignited everything. The stage door opened. Mark Wahlberg stepped out, not just as a movie star, but as someone carrying years of grit, effort, and hard-earned resilience. His walk was steady, shoulders firm, confidence clear. This wasn't arrogance, it was the grounded presence of someone who had fought for every inch of success. The applause roared. Cameras zoomed in, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. Then Jimmy smiled from behind his desk, the expression stretched wide like a mask. To viewers at home, it read as charm. To those more familiar with the game, it hinted at something else entirely. Kimmel understood timing, provocation, and the thrill of pushing just enough to make headlines. But on this night, his timing would backfire. The opening words were polite, familiar. A welcome, a mention of Mark's new film classic Small Talk, meant to ease into the interview. The crowd leaned in, waiting for the spark between the two men. But behind the desk, Jimmy's eyes glimmered with something colder. Then it happened. A joke disguised as a question, sharpened with sarcasm. So, Mark, how does it feel being Hollywood's most overpaid tough guy? The room went still. The expected laughter never came. Silence settled heavily so, complete that every shift in a seat, and every small cough, felt amplified. Wahlberg's jaw set. The cameras picked up the flicker in his eyes, the slight shift in his posture, the effort it took to stay composed. Jimmy leaned back, confident he'd landed a clever moment. What he didn't realize was that those 34 seconds would be the start of something he didn't anticipate. Even before the next question, tension swelled. The audience sensed it. The crew sensed it. And somewhere beneath his practiced smile, Jimmy sensed it, too. This wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. This was the night the script unraveled. Mark Wahlberg isn't just another celebrity on a late-night couch. His life has been built from tough beginnings, relentless work, and second chances taken with unshakable resolve. He has carried blockbuster franchises, produced films from the ground up, and built businesses beyond the screen. To fans, he embodies the belief that a shattered past can be rebuilt. To critics, he is tireless, never letting labels define him. That night, he arrived with one intention: to promote his new film. A demanding action project shaped by countless hours of training and the dedication of an entire team. He came to celebrate their work, share stories, maybe laugh about the injuries and mishaps that come with doing his own stunts. More than anything, he came to connect with the audience, those who buy tickets and support his craft. Across from him sat Jimmy Kimmel, a host who had long built his career on sharp wit and biting jokes. Late-night television had placed him among its most recognizable figures. He could turn a mistake into a viral moment, roast public figures with equal vigor, and wield laughter like a weapon wrapped in entertainment. When he struck the right tone, audiences loved him. But unchecked, his humor sometimes crossed a thin line between clever and cruel. That night, his charm carried an edge. He wasn't merely greeting a guest, he was sizing up a challenge. With control of the pacing, the audience, and the microphone, he held the advantage. He could shift tone, cut to commercial, or manipulate a moment with a simple look. On a late-night stage, the host usually holds the power. But Wahlberg wasn't someone who played the fool. He didn't come from a world where power was handed to him. He fought for it, protected it, and carried it with quiet determination. Sitting across from Kimmel, his steady composure and Jimmy's smirk clashed like metal against stone. The audience didn't techno it yet, The producers didn't techno-eat shit, but the night was already changing. Maybe even Jimmy didn't realize it yet. But in those first few minutes, the stage had already been set for something much larger than a routine film appearance. This wasn't simply a guest sitting across from a host. It was dignity versus derision, resilience versus arrogance. And when those forces collided, only one of them would walk away untouched. The remark dropped like a blade hidden inside a joke. So, Mark, how does it feel being Hollywood's most overpaid tough guy? In a moment, the atmosphere in the studio shifted. What had just been excitement now felt heavy and unpredictable, like a storm forming out of nowhere. Laughter, the heartbeat of late-night television, never arrived. Not a chuckle, not even a nervous sound. Instead, silence settled across the room. The audience froze, unsure whether they were supposed to laugh or recoil. Was this harmless teasing? Or had Jimmy Kimmel stepped over the line? Even the camera crew hesitated, their lenses fixed on a moment that suddenly felt painfully unscripted. Mark Wahlberg didn't move. He sat still, jaw tight, a faint flicker of irritation crossing his face. But when he finally spoke, his voice carried calm professionalism. "Jimmy," he said evenly, "I'm here to talk about the movie. The crew gave everything to this project, and I think people will be excited about what we made. It was a smooth redirection, disciplined, restrained, in control." Wahlberg wasn't he looking for a confrontation? Not yet. But Jimmy wasn't ready to drop it. Leaning back with his trademark smirk, he pushed again. "Oh, come on, Mark," he drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. "Everybody knows you just show up, flex a bit, say a few lines, and walk out with $20 million. Must be nice living that easy life." Gasps rippled through the audience like wind moving across a field. This wasn't playful teasing anymore. It was a deliberate hit, delivered in front of millions. Meant to sting, and it did. Mark's eyes narrowed. For the first time that night, the fire beneath his controlled exterior showed through. His posture shifted just enough that everyone watching felt the change. This wasn't the reaction of someone caught off guard. This was the response of a man who had been underestimated too many times. "Easy life," he repeated, voice steady but edged like a blade. That was the moment the tone changed. The instant when the air between them stopped being an interview and turned into a battleground. On one side was Jimmy Kimmel, protected by his desk, his microphone, and the illusion of automatic laughter. On the other side was Mark Wahlberg, armed only with truth, discipline, and decades of scars earned from climbing out of nothing. Respect versus humiliation. Authenticity versus mockery. And as the silence stretched, one thing became undeniable. Jimmy Kimmel had just stirred up a storm he wasn't ready for. The shift came quietly at first. Like the pressure drop before thunder, Wahlberg leaned in slightly, staring directly at Kimmel. His voice was calm, but every word carried steel. "Easy life," he said again. "Let me tell you what that looks like. Jimmy, it looks like waking up at 4 in the morning every day. It looks like training until your body's breaking down, then pushing through anyway. It looks like months of preparation, doing my own stunts, putting myself on the line so people get something real." The words hit hard. The audience that normally laughed through roasts stayed silent. They listened. They felt the studio's temperature rise. This wasn't banter anymore. This was a man defending not just himself, but the work of hundreds of people who stood behind every project he made. Across from him, Kimmel tried to force a smirk, but it wavered. He wasn't used to someone pushing back like this, especially not on his own stage. Still, he leaned back as if distance would soften the tension, and went for another jab. "Oh, come on," he said, struggling to regain footing. "Not everyone gets handed roles just because they've got muscles. Some of us had to work our way up the hard way." That was the line. The moment Jimmy stepped into dangerous territory, Mark's jaw clenched. He leaned forward, expression unyielding, and his words cut through the air with cold precision. "Do you know where I was when I was 15, Jimmy?" His voice dropped lower, darker. "I wasn't on a college campus figuring out how to make fun of people for a living. I was on the streets, trying to survive." The studio froze. No one moved. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. I didn't have connections. I didn't have wealthy parents. Nothing was handed to me. Everything I have, I fought for every single step. These weren't rehearsed lines. They weren't crafted for publicity. They were raw, real, pulled straight from a past most people in the room could barely comprehend. The discomfort that had filled the room moments earlier shifted into something entirely different respect. A sense swept through the audience that they were witnessing not just a celebrity defending himself, but a man stripping away the surface and revealing something honest. Jimmy's smirk faltered again. He tried to laugh, but the sound cracked in, strained, unconvincing. For the first time, the late-night king looked unsettled. Mark didn't ease up. His gaze stayed fixed on Jimmy, his voice building in force and clarity. You think this is about me, Jimmy? About whether I get paid too much or show too many muscles? It's bigger than that. This is about respecting the work, respecting the people who give everything they have to create something worth watching. The audience shifted, some nodding, others leaning in, drawn into the weight of his words. There are young actors out there, Mark continued, his tone tightening. Kids juggling 2 or 3 jobs just to afford acting classes. Kids who sit in these chairs praying for a chance, and they have to sit there while someone with a microphone decides their dreams are a punchline. The room fell into a heavy silence. Even the studio crew veterans who had seen every kind of live TV disaster stood motionless, captivated. Mark's voice dropped again, low and steady, carrying an authority that cut through every distraction. I've made real mistakes in my life. I've hurt people. I've spent years trying to make that right. But don't stand there and tell me I didn't earn what I've built. Don't reduce everything I've worked for to some joke about an easy life. Jimmy swallowed hard. Sweat glistened under the hot lights. His hand twitched as he reached for his mug. His usual weapon, sarcasm, quick quips, rehearsed one-liners were failing him. The laughter he depended on wasn't coming. The audience wasn't. They on East Side. They were with Wahlberg, hanging on every word as he dismantled arrogance with nothing but honesty. For Kimmel, the fight he believed he was winning had already slipped away. And for Wahlberg, this wasn't banter anymore. This was a reckoning. Tension had reached its breaking point. Every sentence from Wahlberg hit squarely at Kimmel's polished image. The host, normally invincible behind his desk, was unraveling under the glare of the cameras. His laughter cracking like glass. Then, in a last, desperate attempt to reclaim control, Jimmy Kimmel made the mistake that changed everything. He leaned in, voice sharp, smirk thinner than ever. You think you're better than me? You think a few action movies make you some kind of saint? Everyone knows about your past, Mark. Everyone knows you were a thug before you were an actor. The words exploded in the room. Instantly, the studio plunged into a different kind of silence, not awkward, not humorous, but suffocating. The audience froze, eyes flicking between the two men, as if watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, as though the machinery itself recognized the magnitude of the moment. Wahlberg didn't flinch. His face didn't contort with anger. He didn't lunge across the desk as some viewers feared or expected. Instead, something colder flashed in his eyes, a dangerous calm, a silence that carried more weight than any shout. There it is, Mark said quietly, his voice slicing through the tension. That's the real Jimmy Kimmel. When you can't win with jokes, you go straight for the personal attacks. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some gasped. Others looked down, unable to watch. Jimmy tried to retreat, his voice unsteady. Mark, I didn't mean... Yes, you did, Wahlberg cut in, voice unwavering. You've been waiting for the perfect moment to bring up my past. You thought if you pushed hard enough, I'd snap. You wanted a scene. You wanted me angry. Well, congratulations. Jimmy, you got your scene, just not the one you imagined. He rose slowly, deliberately. The entire room held its breath. For a moment it seemed he might cross the desk and end the night with fists instead of words. Kimmel's face drained of color, his hands trembling around his mug. But Wahlberg didn't move toward him. Instead, he stood tall, filling the space with presence, and chose a weapon far more devastating than violence. The truth. You want to talk about my past? Mog's voice echoed across the studio, steady, powerful. Fine. Let's talk about it. Yes, I made mistakes. Serious ones. I hurt people. I lost my way. But do you know what I did, Jimmy? Primera und Italiano. I didn't hide behind a desk or mask cruelty as humor. I faced the people I hurt. Primera apologis et. I worked every day to make it right. Jimmy sat frozen, a deer in headlights, with nowhere left to retreat. His usual arsenal of jokes and snappy comebacks was useless. Now, with every sentence Wahlberg delivered, another piece of the armor Jimmy had worn for years fell away. You think dragging up someone's past on national television makes you powerful? Wahlberg said, his voice not louder, but sharper. It makes you weak. It shows everyone that when you're cornered, you don't have substance. You only have spite. The studio was utterly still. People in the audience leaned in, completely absorbed, some subtly lifting their phones to record every second. This wasn't late-night comedy anymore. It was something raw, unfiltered, something everyone knew would echo through Hollywood for a long time. You see, Jimmy, here's the difference between us. Wahlberg leaned closer, his gaze locked on Kimmel. When I fail, when I don't deliver, when I fall short, movies lose money, people lose jobs, fans lose faith. There are consequences. But you sit there, tear people down, and tomorrow night, you're right back in that chair, doing it again. No consequences. Just more cheap shots. Jimmy's facade finally crumbled. His lips trembled, his eyes darting toward the crowd, the crew anywhere but at Wahlberg. He reached for his coffee again, his hands shaking so hard the mug clinked against the desk. The cameras captured every detail. You know what's really easy, Jimmy? Mark's voice sliced through the quiet, hiding behind jokes. Pretending cruelty is just entertainment. Datese, easy. What's hard is actually creating something, actually putting yourself out there, actually risking failure while the whole world is watching. For the first time in his career, Jimmy Kimmel looked powerless. The desk, the microphone, the lights, none of it could protect him. He was trapped, not by a movie star's fists, but by his own reflection. Mark stepped back just a little, giving the room space to absorb his words. The silence thickened. When he spoke again, his tone was softer, but no less devastating. You wanted to make me look small tonight. Instead, you showed everyone exactly who you are. Kimmel blinked, his eyes glassy. The smirk was gone. The swagger was gone. He no longer looked like late night's reigning king, just a man laid bare, his insecurities exposed under the glare of his own stage. In that moment, the balance of power flipped completely. Mark Wahlberg stood tall, not just as an actor defending his name, but as a man reclaiming his son. The audience, once firmly under Kimmel's command, now sat in Wahlberg's corner, silent, riveted, hanging on every word. The host, who was usually untouchable behind a wall of laughter, was suddenly exposed in his own domain. The aggressor had become the cornered one. The king had been knocked from his throne live raw, and in a way that couldn't be undone. The silence was suffocating. Jimmy sat behind his desk, pale and shaking. The trademark smirk was long gone. His eyes flicked around the studio as if searching for a way out that wasn't there. The cameras rolled. The crowd stared. The world watched. He swallowed and tried to steady his voice. Look, Mark, I didn't mean it like that. Maybe I went too far with the jokes, but the apology rang hollow, a flimsy cover over damage that was already done. The audience didn't buy it. More importantly, Mark Wahlberg didn't buy it. Jimmy pushed on, panic creeping into every word. We can fix this. We'll edit it out. Cut the bad parts. Nobody has to see it. We can just start over. For the first time that night, Mark let out a short, humorless laugh. He leaned in, voice calm but unwavering. There's no do-over, Jimmy. Not tonight. This is who you chose to be on this stage, in front of these people. You tried to make me look small. Instead, you showed everyone exactly who you are. The statement landed like a final blow. Jimmy's expression crumpled. The weight of what he'd done to how completely he'd lost control pressed down on him like the heat of the lights above, now less like stage lights and more like interrogation lamps. His hand trembled as he grabbed his mug again, but he didn't drink. Who stilled it, as if it were the only solid thing he had left? Mark, please, he whispered, voice breaking. Don't walk out. We can move on. Talk about your movie. Anything. Just don't leave it like this. But Wahlberg's face didn't soften. He didn't gloat, didn't shout, didn't bask in the moment. Instead, he reached for the microphone, clipped to his shirt, and began to remove it. Slowly, deliberately. In the dead quiet of the studio, the tiny sounds of the mic coming loose seemed deafening. With every movement of Mark's hand, the last of Kimmel's control slipped away. Wahlberg set the microphone gently on the coffee table between them. His eyes never left Jimmy's. You don't get to erase this. You don't get to cut it, spin it, or bury it. What happened here tonight? That es real, and people deserve to see it. Kimmel's eyes filled with tears undeniable. Unedited tears that ran down his face under the brutal studio lights. The man who had spent years mocking others, weaponizing laughter, now sat broken, pleading for a mercy that wasn't coming. No one moved. Phones stayed raised. The audience recorded everything, preserving the moment. Crew members stood motionless at the edges of the stage. No one stepped in. Everyone understood they were witnessing something that went far beyond a segment gone wrong. Mark Wahlberg straightened his jacket, still perfectly composed. He had dismantled the host, the show, and the illusion of control without ever raising his voice or throwing a punch. For once, the gatekeeper of Hollywood's couch wasn't the one in charge, and everybody knew it. Wahlberg stood there, his mic lying silent between them. The lights carved his silhouette into something unshakable, highlighting the calm resolve in his eyes. He looked at Jimmy one last time, not with rage, but with something far more cutting disappointment. If you're going to attack someone's character, aside firmly. His voice clear in the stillness. Make sure your own can stand up to the same scrutiny. The line landed like a final verdict. For Jimmy, there was no recovering. He slumped behind his desk, stripped of the persona he'd worn for so long. The smirk, the jokes, the air of invincibility gone, shattered in front of a live audience. Mark adjusted his jacket, then turned and began walking toward the edge of the stage. Each step echoed across the floor, stamping the moment into memory. He wasn't escaping the confrontation, he was rising above it, leaving not defeated, but unquestionably victorious. The crowd remained frozen, eyes locked on him. No! Blause. No laughter, just stunned silence. They had arrived expecting jokes and light-hearted promotion. What they got was a lesson in dignity. Reminder of what happens when cruelty is confronted by courage. Jimmy Kimmel stayed at his desk, face streaked with tears under the harsh lights. This time, the cameras weren't framing him as the sharp-tongued ruler of late night. They were capturing the unraveling of a man who had thought himself untouchable. Only to be reminded that respect doesn't come from power, it comes from character. The studio felt like a place in mourning. Even the faint hum of the air system seemed louder than the people in their seats. Crew members stood frozen, headsets forgotten. Everybody knew they had seen something that would be talked about far beyond that room. As Wahlberg disappeared into the backstage shadows, his message lingered, impossible to ignore. Dignity had outlasted arrogance. Honesty had quieted cruelty. Respect had proven stronger than mockery. And Jimmy Kimmel once, the master of cutting jokes and smug laughter, was left with the wreckage of his own behavior. His image, his aura, his grip on the room wall, gone in the course of a single interview. In the end, one truth stood above everything else. In 34 seconds of arrogance, Jimmy Kimmel lost the one thing a comedian can't live without: respect.